So we've talked a little bit about glaciers and that's all well and good, but sometimes it's actually hard to visualize what a glacier actually looks like, especially if you've never seen one. So this is actually a 3D sort of rendering of the Reclus Glacier, which is part of the Southern Patagonian ice field. That's actually courtesy of Camilo Rada, who is working with one of the students, Max Van Wyck de Vries, in our research group with Andy, and he actually was able to put this together. And I think this is a really useful, kind of interesting tool for getting a better grasp on what glaciers actually look like. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through this and just sort of talk through what's going on in this glacier. So as you can see, this is obviously a 3D version, but we can see we've got sort of our mountains on either side and our nice sort of glacier terminating in this sort of waterfront here. If we kind of look upwards, we can see we've got lots of sort of cool debris going on the ice here. We talk about glaciers flowing and oftentimes it's hard to actually imagine what that looks like, but we can see here, this is actually the result of a landslide. And as we have sort of this variable flow going on the ice, the landslide actually sort of dissipates in sort of this really interesting shape here. And I think you can kind of take a second here to recognize why this type of shape would make sense. So we have sort of the fastest moving portions of the ice appearing to be sort of in this middle as we have the debris sort of advanced further down the ice. And then we have some sort of slower flow going on along the edges of the ice. And this makes sense because, as we get closer to the edges of the valley, we not only have to worry about some of the drag and everything going on at the base of the ice, there's also drag and erosion along the sides. And so, we think looking just sort of generally at the sides of this, we can also see that there's definitely, the ice is in contact with the sides of these mountains where it's actively going to be eroding away, creating lateral moraines. We'll talk a little bit more about different types of glacial landforms, the different types of features that glaciers make on the landscape in the next page. But I just think this is a really good way to sort of visualize generally, we have the ice not only working along here, eroding along sort of the sides, we also have it terminating. We can kind of see some really tiny little icebergs floating off from this pretty cool glacier. And then also, you learned a little bit about the equilibrium line altitude. And so we can see here a pretty distinct difference sort of in the front of the ice where we would have ablation and maybe up here beyond the snow line. And so our ELA is probably going to be somewhere, in here. It's obviously a bit harder to see just glancing at this, but it's sort of a useful visualization tool for just sort of how massive glaciers are and how they really do sort of occupy large spaces. And so these are literal mountains and there's a big tongue of ice going through them and we can kind of see some of the processes. And we're actually on this sort of side glacier here. It might be a bit hard for you to see, but we do have, again, some snow up here, better sort of ablation, more clear bare ice here, debris on top of it. And then if you just turn this right angle here, you can see that there's also a little river that's coming off the edge of this little tongue of ice. And that's really important in thinking about paraglacial processes, sort of the processes going on around the ice and how the ice is able to not only, directly influence the landscape through the generation of glacial landforms, but it also indirectly changes the landscape through creating these sort of proglacial rivers. Pro means, in front of, at the base of the ice, proglacial rivers, proglacial lakes, those types of things. And that'll be another thing that we'll talk about in our third page for this sort of unit that we're going through on glaciers.